Hello everyone! In this video I'm going to show you how to make a basic ring band. I have already cut the blank, and for a size 9 with a thickness of 1.3 I've determined that the blank needs to be 63.2 millimeters. I have filed the edges and I have filed the ends as well. Everything is straight and true, and the blank has been annealed and pickled. We are going to be using half round pliers. So one side is round, the other side of the jar is flat. And to bend the strip of metal, to close it so that it can be soldered later, we start from one end and make sure that you go curve to curve. So the round side of the pliers is where the curve of the metal is, so you don't make any dents in the metal. So bend slightly from one end, then move to the other end, bend slightly, and so on and so on. And every time we bend a little further, we go towards the middle of the blank, and this way we create an even tension throughout the blank, the strip of metal. As always, you should be resting your hands on the bench pin and really use the bench pin as you work to give you more stability and more control. So it's almost closed now, and now I'm really going to brace my work on the bench pin and push and squeeze everything together to bring it even closer. At this point, we are not worried about having a perfectly round shape. We will take care of that later. In fact, it helps to get a better and tighter fit, and that's what I'm doing now. It helps to flatten the top or the area where the seam is a little bit. This way the two ends will meet very tightly and will have a very tight joint. So brace yourself against the bench pin, and remember, this is wood, so it's not going to damage your metal. Then you see the flat area where the seam is. So just, it's closed now, but we need to check from every angle that everything is level. So check from the side and everything is tight as well. That's very important to make sure that everything solders properly later. So I need to make a few adjustments here to make sure it is quite tight. The other thing that we need to do is create some tension, and that's why I'm pushing and making one end overlap over the other. That creates tension, and this way the joint will be even tighter. So now we have a very tight joint. But we need to do another test. We are going to put the joint, the ring, in front of the light, and no light should be passing through if it is very tight. In this case, I need to do one little adjustment to make it perfectly tight. And that's it. So now we have this very nice tight joint, and the ring needs to be annealed and pickled because it is now work hardened from all the bending in the work. And if we solder when it is work hardened, it will relax and open as we start heating up the metal, and the seam risk opening up. So always a need before you solder. Another little thing that you can do, you don't have to, but sometimes it helps get things even tighter. You can saw through the seam, but for safety you need to hold the ring and squeeze it together and hold it in your ring clamp, and you carefully saw through the seam. So this is in a way like filing the two sides of the ring at the same time with a very thin file. So that's it. Now ready for the next step. Everything is ready. We have flux and hard solder, and we have to hold the ring with the fire tweezers, but how we hold it is very important. We have to do it correctly or it won't solder. Remember that they are a heat sink, so we cannot put them too close to the joint, and we can only use the very tip of the tweezers to hold the ring. So if we don't do that, they will absorb too much heat, which means that the seam is not going to get enough and the solder might not be flowing properly. We fluxed both sides of the joint, and now I'm going to dry the flux just a little bit with the torch. It would be easier to have the little pieces of solder stay right where they need to be. Each little piece of solder is dipped into the flux as well, and in that way they stick a little bit more to the seam, and that prevents them from moving too much. For this size of ring, this width, 3 pieces, medium-sized pieces are usually enough. They do spread, they don't have to touch. And now, to solder, we need to heat up the entire piece first. So we'll avoid putting the flame on the seam, and we'll heat up the entire piece except for the seam, and we'll make sure that both sides are heated up evenly. It is also very important. If one side is hotter than the other, the solder will probably flow to the side instead of flowing right down into the seam. So this is very, very important. Now the other thing we need to do is look at the color of the flux. When it turns darker, dark brown, it indicates that we're close to the melting point of the solder. And then soon after that, the solder melts, bright little puddles of solder, and we turn the ring around to make sure it is showing up on the other side, and we can pull the solder through the seam with the torch. Do not quench, air cool, and pickle. So no quenching when there is a solid seam, and that's it. After pickling, check the seam, make sure that there was enough solder, and make sure that the solder went right through the seam. If not, you'll have to add more solder and repeat the process. Now we are going to shape the ring using a ring mandrel and a rawhide mallet. So the objective is to make the band perfectly round. We are going to slide the ring on the mandrel and push it up as far as it goes. You can use a stump or the edge of your bench to support the mandrel. We'll flip the ring on the other side and hammer again. Same process. We're flipping the ring to avoid making it into a cone. Since the mandrel is tapered, we want to stretch both sides the same amount evenly. Now, the ring looks nice and round, but is it perfectly round? Not quite. So let's try to understand or see how it works. The mandrel is tapered, so only one edge of the band is actually touching the mandrel. You see here, looking from the side, that there are gaps between the band and the mandrel. So we need to continue hammering until there is no more gaps. And we'll flip the ring again and repeat the process and so on the other edge of the band until there is no gaps between the band and the mandrel. So let's check again. And if we look from the other end, where from the tapered side, you see that no, the band is not touching the mandrel. There is a gap all around. So that makes sense. Now, there is another check we can do. Look inside the band and let's see if it looks bright and shiny all over. Here I see that no, not quite. It is bright and shiny mostly, but there are spots, there are dull matte spots in some places. So these are the spots where the band was not touching the mandrel. So they haven't come in contact with the mandrel. So I will need to hammer these spots to make the ring perfectly round. So until the entire surface inside the band is bright and shiny, it won't be perfectly round. So this is another little trick and a great way to test that the band has been hammered and is now perfectly round. You can also, throughout the process, check the size of your ring, of course. In my case, it needs to be size 9. Now that the ring is perfectly round, it's time to do all the cleaning. That means filing and sanding and polishing eventually. So the objective of cleaning is to remove the excess solder on the joint, to smooth out the surface of the ring, removing eventual tool marks, clean inside, and bevel the sharp edges. So you need to file all the surfaces of the band, and that means outside with a hand file, cut number 2, and you can use a flat file for this, and the inside of the ring will be filed with a ring file, the half round file, cut number 2 as well. So that is the first step of the cleaning process. Now let's see how we can file the inside of the ring with the half round hand file number 2. That's the motion that you would do. Of course, you rest your work on the bench pin. And this is a better angle, so this is how you move your file. And you rotate the band at the same time. Now we have to work on the edges. We're going to file the edges. You can use a flat file or the flat side of your half round ring, number 2. And again, it's done when everything is nice and straight and the seam has disappeared. And you repeat on the other side of the band. Now, you can use for a quicker method, you can use a very large rough or bastard file, something you can find at the hardware store, very wide, about 1 inch wide or more, very rough, and you can first use it in this way. It's quite fast, but you would still have to finish up with your nice jewelry hand file after that. Now, these edges are very sharp, so they have to be beveled very lightly. And we use our hand file again. And you remove just the sharp edge of that on each side, on the outside of the band, as you can see here. And then the inside edges will have to be done too. And that you can do it with your file, or you can use a scraper, and you just pass the scraper gently around on the inside edge, and that removes just the very sharp edge, which would be very uncomfortable to wear, and that's all you need to do. And of course, repeat on the other side. Now, this ring looks very nice and clean, but we are not ready for the next step yet. We need to check for another potential issue, and that's firescale. So this has to be removed before we go on to sanding, which is our next step. Firescale is deep oxidation that is difficult to see because it's hidden under a layer of fine silver. When we file, sand, and polish, we generally uncover this deep oxidation. It becomes more of an issue. It's difficult to see because the metal is shiny. To check the surface, put the ring, the metal, on a piece of white paper, and you can see these gray stains or these dark clouds on the surface. That's the firescale. So this needs to be removed before you go to the next step. Now that everything has been filed, inside, outside, and the edges, you need to sand, and we will use the 3 grits of sandpaper, starting with the coarse and medium and finishing with the fine grit. You would use the sticks to sand the outside of the ring, but for the inside you need to use your flex shaft and with a roll of sandpaper. Again, all 3 grits need to be done for that. And this is how you would hold the ring and how you would sand the inside. Now, at this point, the ring would need to be polished, but for the purpose of our exercise, we just leave it with this nice, soft, sanded finish. And that's it. We are done with that. Thanks for watching.